Exactly 600 years ago on this day, July 21st, 1425, one of the wisest and most experienced Roman emperors was lost to us, Manuel II Palaiologos, third last Basileus to Rhomaion before the fall of Constantinople. And as I speak of 2025, I still am at awe at a personality such as his. You who follow my channel know at length now Manuel's jests as the statesman and head of the Roman state, how he surmounted myriad challenges when he inherited an empire in such a bad shape, how he maneuvered around Italians and Ottomans masterfully ever since he was a prince that wasn't even considered for imperial succession, all the way until his death, working at maximum capacity for the Romans even after retiring due to his stroke. And I have always emphasized how multi-talented Manuel was, considering that he was the Roman emperor with simply the largest amount of personal writings we have left, and he didn't just leave us quantity, but quality too. Manuel was genuinely good at writing and expressing himself, and he wrote over such a diverse range of topics. Philosophical works like Marcus Aurelius, theological ones like Leon VI the Wise, didactic manuals for his sons like Constantinos VII Porphyrogenitus, and I think he doesn't get nearly the credit he deserves for being so impressive and still finding the time to write everything in an age when the empire was literally collapsing. So, it's time to shed some light on Manuel as an intellectual, and a damn good author who exposed his thoughts so beautifully. This task is not something that a mere layman such as myself could amount to. I've only read a few selected works of Manuel, and most of them in translation too. To introduce you to the corpus of Manuel, an actual expert was needed, and I found the perfect woman for the job, Siren Çelik, who has written extensively on Manuel II and his era in general, and who has published a most excellent book that approached Manuel's life from a biographical perspective. So, naturally, all his works are discussed in detail. Highly recommend this book for anyone interested. It is so good and helped me immensely with my research back when I was covering the Palaiologan period for you guys. So without further ado, I present my enchanting conversation with Dr. Çelik. It was delightful to talk with such an enthusiast. So, today we are here with Dr. Siren Çelik. She is an associate professor at the history department of Marmara University in Istanbul, and she was instructed in Byzantine studies at the University of Birmingham, and she has published numerous works about the late Palaiologan era with a specific focus on Manuel II. So I think you're pretty much the world expert on Manuel II right now, which is why we're doing this interview.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. And also thank you for your very kind words. And there were, of course, many others who are working on Manuel II.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
But
but I did write the biography on him. So, yeah.
yes, your biography was really good. I loved it. I read it, and it was just, it gave a very fresh perspective on this character that not a lot of people talk about, but he is so fascinating.
I agree totally.
So I think we should let you give the audience a little introduction to Manuel II, about his life and his times, and why he was important.
Okay, well, we're speaking about the last, the third emperor of the Byzantine Empire. So we're speaking about mid-14th century, early 15th century. And he lived during really, really interesting times. I mean, not only was he constantly fighting with the Ottomans, watching his empire crumble, during his reign, Constantinople endured no less than three sieges by the Ottomans. He had to go to Western Europe to seek aid against the Ottomans in person. He even visited Paris and London. He traveled throughout his empire, and he also witnessed many civil wars between his family members. And not only that, Manuel was not just an emperor, but he was also a very prolific writer of his time. So he authored many literary, philosophical, and theological works, was of course in contact with the Byzantine intellectuals of the time. He also had interactions with Ottoman intellectuals as well as with early Renaissance figures. So we are really speaking about a very rich and very intriguing life.
Yeah, I could feel like he's almost something of a Renaissance man before the Renaissance.
Yeah, in some ways, because he's also wearing so many hats.
That's true, figuratively and literally. He loved the
Yes,
late Byzantine hats.
me too.
Uh, so yeah. Well, Manuel, he, as you said, he's a very interesting person. He has wrote many works. So how many works in total? Do we know that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, today we have 33 surviving works by him. I'm treating the letters as a whole work, as a collection.
Okay.
I mean, of course, there is the possibility that he might have written more and simply they just did not survive. But today we have around 33 extant works. What do we have? We have a letter collection, several orations, homilies, poetry, theological and philosophical dialogues, rhetorical exercises, so on and so forth. So we are speaking also about a very diverse, work of literature.
Yeah. So which ones are like the most important ones? Can you give us a little description of them?
Well, I mean, I love all of them, but in terms of like its historical contents and maybe the length, first, the funeral oration, I would say, is pretty significant. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a funerary oration he wrote for his brother, the despot of the Morea. It
Mm-hmm.
is almost like a mini history of Morea during Manuel's reign as well. So it is not just a funerary oration. That one, I think, is a very significant work. The letter collection, I would say, is also quite important. Not only does it, provide us with lots of historical information, insights into his personality, but I find the style to be quite engaging. What else? A slightly lesser known work because it's theological, the dialogue with a Persian. So this is a massive dialogue. So like the modern edition is around like 300 pages in
Oh
Greek.
wow.
Yeah, so same thing with the funeral oration, for example. So this is essentially a sort of semi-fictional dialogue between him and an Ottoman müderris, a Muslim theologian, and they are discussing and sort of comparing Islam and Christianity. This one I also find to be a fascinating work.
I think it would be really fascinating, and I think we will be able to talk about it a little bit more in detail later on in the interview.
Yeah.
So yeah, Manuel, he was quite the writer, let's say, but I think everyone who writes, he has to have some sort of a motivation, right? Like,
Mhm.
why did he turn to literature? Why do you think he turned to literature in the end? Because, well, as you have introduced, Manuel's life, he was not living in the best of times for the Byzantines. He had a very tumultuous empire to take care of. So how did he find the free time to write and express his thoughts like that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think little bit of it is genetic because his grandfather,
Mm,
John Cantacuzzinos, is a writer. Interestingly, his mother, Eleni Cantacuzzini, she was also a writer, although her works don't survive. Maternal uncle, Matthias Cantacuzzinos, wrote. So this
mhm.
could be an influence. But also, these works by Manuel had their ideological and political and theological functions. So, be it a letter, a poem, I don't know, a theological dialogue, an oration, if you analyze all of them, you see that they usually have political or personal messages. So it is not just about putting pen to paper or like expressing his ideas or emotions, but he's like defending his political decisions, legitimizing his status as the emperor, or like lending sanction to some theological debates. And we know that some of them were performed in a theatron, in a literary gathering aloud, and many of them were also circulated. So they also have other sorts of agenda behind them. But also, we shouldn't be too cynical about it, thinking like, okay, he was just writing for political ends, this was just a tool for him. I really don't think so, because he also says it elsewhere, and I feel it in his writings, that he also enjoyed the pursuit for its aesthetic sake. Yes, it served many purposes for him as well, but I also feel that he genuinely liked writing. experimenting with different genres, using his favorite metaphors, taking care of his prose rhythm. So I think it was the combination of everything. And there is also the possibility that he was exploring writing as a sort of an outlet to, to deal with the stress and with the problems. And of course, it was sort of enabling him to combat with all these problems as well. Because, when there was like a big theological debate or a heated political dispute between him and his nephew, John VII, we see him turning to writing. So I think all in all, it was like a very complicated package.
Yeah, I agree. So I think like now I have some friends who study psychology, then they would also, recommend writing as a way to let out the stress, let out everything that's bottling up, especially in times of trouble. So I can definitely relate with Manuel on that. On the topic of like his family, I knew that John VI and his mother, like they were both writers, but I didn't know his uncle, like Mateus, was also a writer. Like, what did he write? Can you explain a bit on that?
He has a very small theological treatise that I know of. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there was an oration by Nikolaos Kavasilas. So he was praising Matthäus's writing as well. But he was definitely really, really minor compared to his father.
Yeah, definitely, because I didn't even hear about his works before today. So, yeah, Manuel definitely was influenced a lot by his family. What about like other people, like those who came before him, literary giants from the classical and medieval age, other Greeks, Romans, or other writers who have influenced the way he writes?
Sure. I mean, first of all, we obviously know and realize that Manuel received a really good education, which means for an elite young man that he studied all of the major classical Greek authors. So,
Mhm.
Plato, for example, he was a big part of the Byzantine curriculum. And especially when you look at his dialogues, they are clearly Platonic in style. So, Manuel, yes, was influenced by Plato. His philosophical works are imbued with lots of Aristotelian ethics, so clearly he was influenced by Aristotle as far as his ethical philosophy was concerned. We know that he read and appreciated Homer a lot, although he didn't really write any Homeric style poetry. Demosthenes was another big influence, I would say, and one can feel it especially in Manuel's Discourse to the Thessalonians, an early work when he wrote when he was ruling Thessaloniki. He clearly read and appreciated Aristophanes because he makes several very witty allusions to Aristophanes' texts.
Is it like
So
an
he
inside joke
knew.
to his friends?
Yes, exactly.
Ah,
In the
okay.
dialogue with a Persian, in his letters.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that these were all authors that he was quite familiar with. Gregory of Nazianzus, of course, he knew very well, a medieval author, an early Byzantine one. So he was familiar with many of these, like, big classical canon figures.
So those figures, I'm sure they guided his works and his philosophy in general, what he thought about the world. What about like his writing style? Who does he really imitate, like in his works besides Plato, besides Aristophanes, and
I think it's hard to answer. I don't think that he's imitating anybody specifically in mind. For example, the orations tend to, borrow and make allusions to Demosthenes. Sometimes even like the prose rhythm is similar. The dialogues can be Platonic. Otherwise, I don't really think that there was a specific author or a poet he was trying to imitate. But it was all about blending all these influences, the Byzantine commonplaces, Byzantine rhetorical techniques, and he experimented with it. And I think he also has his own voice. Because, yes, we know that, of course, the Byzantine literati always looked up to the ancients, they imitated models, they followed guidelines and rules. But when you compare like two Byzantine authors, even though they have the same models and the same sort of education, none of them are identical. So I think if one was to read Manuel in original Greek for a long time, you actually get the feel that it is his voice. So, for example, if you read Demetrios Kidones's letter and Manuel's letter, yes, of course, they are both written in Attic Greek in very high style, but they still have a different ring to it.
That's true. So you've said that Manuel, he has a little style to his, and he has his own voice. How would you really describe this kind of voice? This unique Manuel II style?
Well, there are some metaphors and imagery that he's, for example, very fond of using
Mhm.
about sea and water. Yes, of course, this is very commonplace in Byzantine literature. Many authors do that. But I feel that, for example, he really expands upon that, and he comes up with metaphors and imagery that we don't actually see elsewhere. So he takes something really commonplace and widespread, and works on it, experiments on it. Similarly, there are some expressions that he likes using. Like several other late Byzantine authors, he's very fond of trying to mix various genres. So I think you can certainly feel it.
Are there any sorts of vocabulary though, like he uses a lot besides the water imagery though?
Hmm. I don't think so. I mean,
Hmm.
one thing, for example, his style, yes, he writes in Attic Greek, but it's not very archaic. For
Mm-hmm.
example, he doesn't use the dual form a lot. I have only seen three or, two instances of it. What does he really like? I'm thinking and I cannot really think. I mean, it also depends from time to time. For example, when he is ruling Thessaloniki, he and Demetrios Kidones, another intellectual who was also Manuel's teacher, they talk about eleftheria, freedom a lot. And there are all these discussions and allusions to freedom, etc. But this is only specific to a time period in the 1380s.
Yeah, I was just wondering if like he has a specific sort of lexical feel that is very unique to him, but yeah. So we've mentioned his friend, his tutor, Dimitrios Gidonis a few times. Would you like to say a few words on him?
Yeah, so this is, as we can all guess, I guess by now, he was Manuel's teacher and also a very important late Byzantine intellectual and a statesman. So he himself was an author. We have a massive letter collection, 450 letters in total. So
Wow.
a really big one, several orations, and translations of important theological works into into Greek. Sorry, because Kidones was also somebody who was quite close to Latin Catholic culture. He knew Latin. He translated several works, and he also, at some point in his life, he also becomes a Catholic. So this is something that is quite, that is something that sets him apart from many other people in his age. And several of his disciples, like Manuel Kalekas, for example, they also later become Catholic. And he is, of course, a big advocate for the union of the churches. He serves as a messazon to John Cantacuzenios, to John V Palaiologos. He is instrumental in arranging the trip of the latter to Rome, and he is on very good terms with Manuel. Now he dies when Manuel becomes the sole emperor, almost like in 5 to 6 years' time. So it is not like that he was a very influential figure throughout Manuel's rulership, but he was very influential on him, especially on his younger days. So when you look at his letters, for example, you can see that the tone to Kidones is distinctly different. It's very friendly. You can sense that he's looking up to him. He looks for his approval regarding his works. How is my oration? I hope it pleases you. You're my teacher. And we know that from Kidones's letters that he even consulted him on political matters. For example, when he was about to lose Thessaloniki, through Kidones's letters, we understand that he actually momentarily was thinking about going and joining his brother Theodore in the Morea, and Kidones cautions him against the idea, saying that it is a bad idea because you're going to be and you're going to end up fighting your brother maybe for more power, and then he instead directs him to Lesbos to seek refuge with the Genoese ruler there. So he was a very, very big influence on him.
definitely. I can see that Kidonis and his wisdom has seeped through a little into Manuel's reign, even though he wasn't around for very long. Although it's strange that Manuel, he never took up like Kidonis' enthusiasm for Catholicism.
Yeah, of course. But one thing maybe that the impact Kidones's Catholicism left on Manuel is that I would say he was generally very tolerant towards Catholic converts and to Catholics in general. He himself was a very firm Orthodox and a very devout man as well. And he always, approached a possible church union on terms of equality. He wasn't opposed to it, but he certainly didn't want to see Orthodox ideas, doctrines, and theology being compromised. But when you look at his circle, for example, people like Manuel Hrizolovas, who was also Catholic, Manuel made extensive use of him as a diplomat to Western Europe. He co-authored works with him. They worked on things together, on manuscripts. So he wasn't totally close to them. But he never converted himself, of course, and he was also very devoted to orthodoxy.
Yeah, I can see that he's like a steadfast man, but also very open-minded, which is a very good mindset for those days. Alright, so we've talked a lot about Manuel's influences and his decision to become a writer. I think now we should move on to some of Manuel's works themselves. So, yeah, let's start in a more chronological order. So, we know his earliest works were his letters, which you have decided to call one collection, so we're just going to talk about the letters right now. So, these letters that he sent to his friends and contacts, how do you think, like, Manuel, like his letters, how does he stand in the Byzantine epistolary tradition? Like, I've read a lot of Byzantine letters from previous authors, like Uranos and others back in the Middle Byzantine period. Does Manuel's letters feel similar to them? Does he have any innovations? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, of course, he's a very much part of the Byzantine, letter writing tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So he follows all the topoi, the commonplaces through. He adjusts his tone, of course, depending on the recipient. But for example, because he is an emperor, we do not have any like supplicatory letters or like any, letters asking for contacts, recommendations,
Ah,
essentially job-seeking ones. These are
mm,
absent. But what do we have? We have, for example, in quotation marks, recommendation letters that he wrote on behalf of the others. We have letters which accompanied gifts he sent to his close friends, like a horse to Kidonis, very
mm,
expensive gift, a
ooh,
coat, or like some medicine and other things to other people. What else do we have? We have, of course, letters that accompanied his works. For example, Dialogue on Marriage, when he sent it to Kidones, he sent it along with a letter. And of course, we have, answers to those people who are writing to him, petitioning him, things like that. So, in many ways, his collection is different because it is coming from an emperor, and you certainly feel it. But other than that, he follows many of the rules through, like to keep a letter succinct, not too long, not too short, adjusting your tone according to your recipient, adorning your letter with beautiful allusions and metaphors, having multiple layers of meanings. So it is very much essentially letter as a gift.
yeah. If we read the Byzantine letters, we can all feel they're very exquisite and very well written, so definitely. On the
Yeah.
subject of the recipients, you say that his tone changes on who receives the letter. So, who does he usually write to, and what are the kinds of attitudes that he has towards them? And are there like any people that he writes in a more aggressive way to, as in like a hate email?
Well, first of all, we don't have all of Manuel's letters. We only have a small collection,
Mm,
around 60 letters or so. But certainly he did write more. But for some reason, he chose not to save them for posterity. Obviously, the most dominant recipient is Demetrius Kidones. So we have many, many letters that have been written to Kidones and that survive. These are very friendly. You can see that there is a special bond between these two. Also, when he's writing to people like Manuel Hrizolavas, again you see this bond. There is one single letter that was left written to his mother Eleni Cantacuzini, and this one is the letter from an adoring son. You feel that.
Aww, that's so
Yes, I
cute.
mean, but for example, when he's writing to, I don't know, the Archbishop of Thessaloniki, it is more authoritarian in tone. I mean, here is me, the emperor. I'm sending you my canon so that you have it performed in the churches in Thessaloniki. I mean, it's a nice letter, of course, but you now feel the authority of the emperor behind it. Now, as for hate mail in quotation marks, we have four letters by Manuel that the name of the recipient has been deleted, and quite possibly they are either addressed to Macarius of Ancyra, probably some of them, and one of them is certainly talking about Manuel Kalekas, because Manuel had pretty major follow-ups with these people. Manuel Kalekas apparently criticized them for dabbling too much into theology, and he instead suggested that the emperor should attend more to the state affairs. And we have this really bitter letter from Manuel complaining about Kalekas not giving the name, but criticizing him. And then we have the other letters that do not have the recipients, but probably were addressed to Macarius of Ancyra, and they are again very critical, saying you're a horrible man. When your letter was read aloud, the theatron, the literary gathering jeered, you're so disrespectful, etc. So these are really, really different in tone, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk more about the beefs of Manuel with Manuel Kalekas and Macarius of Ancyra, but I think we should move on to his other works. So let's
Sure.
talk about another of his early works. So we've already mentioned it. It's the Discourse to the Thessalonians. You did talk a little bit about this in your book, right? About how he was very happy, he was proud of it, and he sent a copy of it to Gidonius, like, look, teacher, look at how I wrote. You should be happy, read it. So, what really sets it apart? Why was he proud? The Byzantines, they have a very big speech writing tradition, so is there anything about this discourse that sets it apart from the others?
I mean, first of all, the contents and the circumstances are pretty unique
Mm-hmm.
because this was written when Manuel was ruling Thessaloniki, technically almost as an independent emperor, because he had sort of broken off with his father, John V. And he was fighting the Ottomans in Thessaloniki, thinking that he was going to set up another magnificent empire. But of course, this didn't happen. And, despite a few early successes, the Ottomans besieged Thessaloniki for 5 years. And the population was very upset about it, both the wealthy and the poor populace. And we know that many of them were actually slowly in the favor of, surrendering to the Ottomans. This way, at least they knew that the city would not be sacked. And the city was really in a miserable state. So Manuel writes this discourse to the Thessalonians. So it is as if he's speaking to the city populace in general, but probably to a handful of elite men because the style is so difficult.
Yeah.
And he's encouraging them to fight and not to surrender, and how it is more noble to die fighting rather than to submit to the Ottomans, the Muslims. So it is basically like a moral speech. And he thinks it was very well received, etc. So he's very proud of it. Obviously, but in the end, it didn't persuade anybody. But what
Mm.
sets it apart from, for example, Manuel's other orations is that this style is extremely difficult. I mean, Manuel in general, yes, he's a difficult author, but the discourse to the Thessalonians, it is so thorny. So clearly he wrote it, with zeal, labored on it, and came up with this flamboyant, thorny style. There are lots of, sort of allusions to Demosthenes. There are little philosophical discussions embedded into the talk, oration. So clearly, as an early work, it was something that he cherished a lot. And he sent it to Kidonis, who was his teacher, who was also a native Thessalonian. So Manuel was fighting to save Kidonis' city, trying to convince his citizens. So clearly he thought that it was initially at least a very good work. And I would say that in terms of style, I find it to be Manuel's most challenging work to read. I also translated the oration into Turkish with a commentary, and I had such a hard time with it. Because sometimes you think you understand the sentences, but it is just so difficult to translate them.
Yeah, maybe that's why I haven't found any English translations of this work anywhere. So is it because the translators are scared?
I don't know. Also, maybe in terms of when you compare it with the funeral oration or the letters, it's more minor.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the scholars who do discuss Manuel's rule in Thessaloniki, they are totally able to, read and analyze the oration in the original Greek. But yes, actually, an English translation could be interesting.
Yeah, let's hope it will appear sometime in the future, because otherwise these elite men of Thessaloniki are the only ones who are able to understand Manuel. Well, speaking of the elites of Thessaloniki, can you tell us a little bit about the intellectual scene there? Since, like, we've mentioned already about how Thessaloniki was the home to Demetrius Kidonis, and I would imagine there are more like him in the city at the time, even though it was besieged by the Ottomans.
Yeah, certainly. Of course, I mean, Thessaloniki was no Constantinople, but it was still a very big and an important city, and there were many intellectuals there. For example, through his letters and the letters of Kidonis, we know that Manuel had a theatron there, a literary gathering. And, works were being performed aloud, assessed. Many other people were also exchanging letters with Kidones. We also, for example, know that there was a certain Ivan Koster who had a school and was a teacher. And Manuel speaks very fondly of him. And he says, I was able to discuss with you some of my favorite works. So clearly, there was a very lively intellectual atmosphere. And many of the archbishops of Thessaloniki, like Isidoros Glavas or later Simeon of Thessaloniki, these were also very well educated men who were authors themselves. So, yes, intellectually, it was, I think, a very, how to say, satisfactory city in many ways.
I would agree with that. So, well, Manuel, despite all his efforts, I don't think he did save his tutor city, and the Thessaloniki did fall to the Ottomans, unfortunately. So, that was a rather disappointing moment for Manuel, and his life afterwards, it wasn't like just a breeze either. So, as we said already, that Manuel, he kind of uses writing as an outlet during those trying times. Do you think like any of this depression, this frustration, it reveals in his work in the early 1390s after this debacle?
One letter for me stands out in this regard. And it is a letter he wrote after the devastation of the European troops at the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396.
Mhm.
It's a longish letter, and Manuel had his hopes really high for this crusade because he was hoping that the Hungarians and the Franco-Burgundians and the rest, they would be able to hold the Ottomans and the siege of the blockade of Constantinople would be lifted. So he was also involved in the formation of the crusade. But of course, this didn't happen. The Ottomans defeated the Crusaders massively. And so we have this longish letter by Manuel, which is very bitter, really depressed and somber in tone. Lots of images of like stormy weather, very heavy biblical allusions. So this is, for example, one particular instance where you really see the sadness and the frustration and the disappointment coming out.
Yeah, especially like it was during, I think that was like the lowest point of the empire as well during the 14th century. That was then that Bayezid besieged Constantinople, right?
Yeah. So by the time we have the Crusade of Nicopolis, Constantinople was already under blockade for 2 years. And so it wasn't saved, obviously, by the Crusade of Nicopolis, and it remained under blockade until 1402, when Bayezid was defeated by Tamerlane at the Battle of Ankara. So we are almost speaking about an 8-year-long blockade, and it was a really, really hard time, especially for the population of Constantinople.
Yeah, and he who caused this, all of this trouble, Bayezid, can we say a little thing or two about him? Like, he was a very interesting sultan, of course, but also in context to Manuel, I think he's someone we would call his nemesis. Like, there's a very intense rivalry between these two.
Exactly. So yes, Bayezid is a very interesting sultan. I mean, he's very ambitious. He has ambitious visions for the Ottoman state. He expands it a lot in the Balkans, etc. So he's a very capable ruler. And of course, we wouldn't expect a Byzantine emperor and an Ottoman sultan to be friends, certainly.
Nah.
But you're right in the sense that when you look at his writings, there is this personal hatred and, stance against Bayezid. And you don't observe this with Manuel for other Ottoman sultans. And he did interact with quite a few of them because he lived so long. So he really, really seems to have hated Bayezid. He paints Bayezid in the darkest colors possible in all of his writings. He's a monster, he's a terrible man, he's so cruel. And elsewhere, for example, in the funeral oration, he even claims that Bayezid decided to murder him and his brother, the despot Theodore, when they were attending Bayezid in Seves as his vassals. Because by that time, the Byzantines and the Ottomans had this agreement that whenever the Ottoman Sultan summoned the Byzantine Emperor along with the other Balkan vessels, they had to come, attend him wherever he was and fight alongside with him. So, for example, Manuel spent many months when he first became emperor with Bayezid in Asia Minor. He was fighting for the Ottomans. And of course, we have many, many anguished letters as well. And after Seves, for example, it is Manuel's refusal to attend to Bayezid again that triggers this blockade of Constantinople. So there is also this particular rivalry between them. And even after Bayezid's defeat by Tamerlane, we have a psalm by Manuel, like a thankful prayer saying, "Hooray, the Sultan of the Ottomans have been vanquished. I'm so happy." We have an etopoia, which is like a character portrayal. So what would have Tamerlane said to Bayezid when he, captured him? And even Tamerlane thinks that Bayezid is utterly worthless. So yes, I agree that it is extremely personal as well.
No, you could say that in a way Manuel got his literary revenge on Bayezid after some
Exactly.
time.
This is, for example, what the late John Barker calls these two works, who wrote the 1969 monograph on Manuel.
Yeah, I really liked the Barker's work. It was really comprehensive and so many really nice sources. Just, I think you
Yeah.
got a chance to meet him, didn't you?
I did, I did. I mean, he was a really, really nice person, in addition to being a great scholar. And
Hmm.
I agree. I mean, I think his work on Manuel II, and it has been so long since it was written, it still is a masterpiece. He was a great scholar.
Absolutely agreed. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Manuel's time with Bayezid, and we know that one of his interesting things that happened in his vassalship to Bayezid was that he was forced to campaign with the Sultan in Asia Minor against other Byzantines. So then, what did he write during this period? And what do you think? Like, is there? I think he's in a very bad state as well during that time. He's seeing the remains of his former empire, and he's here fighting for the Turks. And does he do any lament of his situation? And if he does lament, does he do it in a very proper way? Because as you said, these letters are already circulated among the Theatron of Constantinople.
So yeah, I mean, it's certainly a really, really interesting episode for us as the historians and a very bad one for Manuel. So
True.
he spent several months with Bayezid and his troops and other Balkan vassals in Asia Minor. They are fighting against the other Turkish emirates like İsfendiyaroğulları and Emirate of Kadı Burhanettin. These are Turkish rivals of Bayezid. So he's trying to unify Anatolia. And we have many letters by Manuel from this one campaign. And he, of course, says, I'm really upset. It depresses me that I'm compelled to fight for our enemies. But he says, trust me, it would be a lot worse if I did not fight for them, because then they would attack us, which is very realistic, of course. And he's, of course, as you said, is very upset when he sees the ruins of the old Roman and Byzantine cities. For example, he sees the ruins of Pompeius Palace and Xenopolis, and he says these were once magnificent cities. They were so well populated when the Byzantines inhabited them, but now they are in ruins. And he says, and nobody even knows what their Greek names used to be. And they tell me that, oh, we have erased these cities and the time has erased them, their names. And he says they are now calling them by some barbaric name. So he's clearly referring to Turkish here. And he says that this is a really sad sight for like whose ancestors once possessed this land, that is himself. Now, of course, these are true reflections of his feelings. I mean, it must be a very depressing state that a Byzantine emperor should be reduced to that. But of course, these are also like attempts to elicit sympathy from his audience back in Constantinople. So here is me, poor emperor, dutiful, brave, fighting for the Turks so that they don't attack you, and woe to me and poor me, I'm seeing all these terrible sights. So he's also trying to portray himself in a, heroic and in a more sympathetic manner.
So it has some propaganda purposes as well.
Exactly. And we also, for example, have some hints from these letters that some people back in Constantinople were criticizing some of Manuel's policies. They were criticizing the fact that he was devoting time to literary pursuits. He says, Manuel, in one of his letters, they were upset this when I did it back home. They would be even more upset now because I'm doing in my tent, when I'm about to go fighting. So he's also trying to like legitimize his interest in literary matters too.
Yeah, were any of those complaints from this Manuel Calecas you mentioned earlier?
We don't know. I mean, it could be. But the chief complaint of Calecas also dates around 1396 again. So at the time when Manuel was writing those letters, and he also has a very lengthy discourse to Jakub, in which again, by not naming him, he's criticizing Manuel Calecas.
So Calecas, I think then Calecas was more criticizing the emperor during the first siege of Constantinople by the Ottomans.
Yes. But I mean, throughout Manuel's reign, there were surely others because we have hints of it.
Mm. Yeah, and I don't think Calecas was the only person to have been discontented Manuel during those hard times. I think another work which was written during the siege of Constantinople, and it is really interesting, is called The Dialogue on the Marriage. Do you think then that this one is also a propaganda aiming at trying to reduce any of his political opponents while his capital was under siege?
I certainly do agree. So this is a much shorter dialogue compared to the dialogue with a Persian. And as the name suggests, it is on marriage. So he is here in a fictional conversation with his mother, the Empress Selini Cantacuzini. And, he's supposedly reluctant to marry. He wants to remain a bachelor. So he's talking about how that he has now been married to his Empress. Things have not been very smooth, like none of his problems have been taken care of. And the Empress mother is, trying to show all the benefits of marriage. But it has like so many political undertones again. So Manuel has to marry because he has an obligation to the empire. His subjects look up to him. He has to provide the empire with an heir. And there are so many like criticisms that he sort of lashes out against his nephew, John VII. Because at the time, John VII is in Selimvria, near Constantinople, and he has a lot of followers, both from the elite and from the many, other segments of the populace. And some of them actually want to see John as the emperor. And we know that John was also in league with Bayezid. They had some sort of agreements with them. And according to some later sources, Bayezid also preferred John as the emperor. So in the dialogue on marriage, Manuel also criticized John VII a lot. You know, he's a traitor. He's conspiring with the enemy. I have been nothing but good to him. You know, I have never offended him, but he has offended me deeply. He is a major threat to empire, etc. And interestingly, after John VII died, he had, all these parts taken out from the dialogue. So to respect the memory of the dead, probably. But so the dialogue on marriage also did function as propaganda, legitimizing Manuel's, position as emperor, defending him against his nephew's claims. Also, I would say there are some very vague hints there that perhaps part of the populace was also blaming Manuel for the siege, because it was him who refused to attend Bayezid, and this is what triggered the siege. I mean, it was probably just a mere pretext because Bayezid was very much interested in conquering Constantinople. But we have these little paragraphs by Manuel saying, it is our duty to defend the city, to die on behalf of our faith if we have to, etc. So probably I think he was also trying to legitimize his, situation there, saying, look, I'm not handing the city over to the Ottomans because it is not the honorable thing to do so.
In this dialogue, he has a very interesting thing, which is that he is letting his mother talk to him about like marriage and honor and all of these topics. So we've mentioned Eleni Kanagozini a bit before, but like, can you properly introduce her a bit here?
So clearly, okay, this is the mother of Manuel, to whom he was apparently really devoted to. And he respected her very much. So the dialogue on marriage is obviously with her. And there is a letter addressed to him. And we know that, for example, when Manuel left for the campaign in Asia Minor, he even left his mother as regent. And we know from other sources that he was also very meticulous about the commemoration of her memory, because the Empress Helena died shortly after the dialogue on marriage. So she was clearly not just his mother, but somebody also who was extremely influential on Manuel. In his in his funeral oration, for example, he says, my brother Theodoros sold Corinth to the Hospitallers also with my mother's blessing. So almost as if like she's a deciding factor, a decisive factor, like the emperor and the despot. And it is very interesting because she also has an interesting life. She's married to an emperor, John V, but she's also the daughter of one, John Cantacuzenios. She's also an author, at least in her earlier years. This we know through the letters of Kidones. So she apparently penned orations for her father. So she was a sponsor and a patron of Kidones. So she was a very sort of politically and intellectually influential figure. And she was also a sister-in-law to Orhan Bey, one of the Ottoman rulers, because her sister Theodora Cantacuzeni was married to the Ottoman ruler. So a really, really interesting life. And the interesting thing also about the dialogue on marriage is that normally when we have such dialogues by Manuel, it is him who is the authority figure in the dialogue. Like everybody looks up to him, he has the answers, he directs the conversations. Here it is his mother. He is like the more novice figure, the one who is looking for advice, etc. And it is the Empress Mother who is the like authoritative figure. She is in charge of the discussion. She corrects Manuel. She berates him when necessary. And so it is very telling, I think, that Manuel relinquishes this literary position of authority to his mother because he doesn't do it for any other dialogue.
Exactly. And I think we can really see that she was just such a big contrast to Manuel's father, John V, who was also, he doesn't seem to share with Manuel the kind of warm bond that we see between him and his mother. And John V doesn't seem to have much educational influence on Manuel either, so.
Yeah, I mean, John V certainly is not somebody who was really interested in intellectual matters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he didn't also share Manuel's firm orthodoxy because he did convert to Catholicism. And any reference we have to John V from Manuel is very sort of, how to say, beautiful, as to be expected. Of course, he said, of blessed memory, our excellent father, the emperor, but nothing intimate here. And they also had fallouts because during his youth, Manuel was, of course, supporting his father against his brother, Andronikos IV. He was imprisoned alongside his father. He was at some point declared co-emperor by him. But at the end, due to some sort of Turkish prompting as well, John V was compelled to reinstate Andronikos and his son as heirs. And Manuel was very upset with this, so he breaks off with his father. He goes to Thessaloniki, rules as a separate ruler, loses the city, is exiled by John V, etc. So there is also like sort of bad episodes between the
Yeah.
two.
Yeah, we can say Manuel had a few daddy issues, but he was really a mommy's boy.
Certainly.
Yeah. And since Manuel has like really let Eleni do the talking in dialogue on the marriage, which I think is a very rare case in Byzantine literature to have like the woman being the one
Yeah,
who is,
exactly.
yeah. So is it fair to like say this kind of use an analogy on classical Greek philosophy that like in the dialogue of marriage, Manuel and Eleni they're in a similar situation as Socrates and Diotima in Plato's dialogue, the Symposium.
Yeah, there is certainly a very interesting parallel there, and I think it's a fair comment. And I think a scholar by the name of Peter Hatley, he already did comment on that. Yeah, so I think it's totally fair.
Hmm. And since Manuel he enjoyed Platonic references and based so much of his dialogues on Plato, let's talk a bit more about your favorite dialogue, the dialogue with the Persian.
Yes.
So yeah, let's talk about how this one was like inspired by other Platonic dialogues and what do you enjoy very much about it?
Okay, so I say it everywhere and I'll say it again here. It's one of my favorite works, probably the favorite. Yes, it's a theological work, so the contents would not be very appealing to so many people, maybe including myself because I'm a historian. But what I find so fascinating about this work is that it is such a lively and rich dialogue because obviously Manuel is not unique in authoring an anti-Islamic dialogue. There are several others from his period, but most of these are like quick answer and question sequences. Like, okay, it says the Muslim, the Saracen, and the respondent, but you don't really get any sense of the characters. In Manuel's case, he's a completely well fleshed out conversant. The Müderris, the Islamic theologian, he's a complex figure. Manuel could have just applied all of the barbarian stereotypes onto him, cold, terrible, cruel, stupid, unkind. But he portrays this Müderris as a witty man, noble man. He's kind, he's hospitable, he's friendly, his conversation is enjoyable. But of course, he is in quotation marks the other. He's a Muslim. His mind doesn't really grasp the finer points of Christianity, etc. So I think it's a really, really nuanced portrayal. And there are so many lively scenes, like how they're having dinner together, how they're like being greeted by the Müderris when he's returning from the hunt. There are several quite interesting vignettes on Bezet, how he's mad about hunting, like he's
Mm.
hunting like crazy in the forest around Ankara, like other Ottomans are quite disapproving of the fact. He's speaking about how angry and upset Bayezid gets when he is unable to go out hunting because there is a storm, how Müderris is like hosting him. So there are so many nice, interesting vignettes. And at one point, which I'm crazy about, Manuel even describes for us the Turkish yufka, a flatbread. And
Oh,
he's writing to his brother Theodoros, so he is the recipient of the work, the dedicee. And he says, the Müderris took me by hand, he led me to this room with this beautiful fire. Sort of small and low table, which is a cine, an Ottoman sort of serving plate table. And he says there were fruits on it, and there were like those paper-like bad bake bread that you know of. And he's speaking about the yufka. So I think
yeah.
it's just, I mean, obviously parts of it are fiction because Müderris, who's such a sound Islamic theologian, never makes a sound argument against Manuel. He's always in aid. Everybody looks up to Manuel. He's like the great theological genius. So obviously in real life, a dialogue wouldn't have gone like that because he was dealing with an expert theologian. It would have been much more like how to say two-sided. But probably many of these scenes that he sort of dispersed across the dialogue were actually inspired at least partially by real life. And when you read this dialogue, I feel that at times it almost becomes close to a modern novel.
Yeah, really, like all those scenes that you described, like the Yufka scene, I can definitely relate to because I love Yufka. I tried it before. It's great. Yes, and also about Bayezid, like the portrayals of Bayezid. Again, it's very funny that Manuel is saying Bayezid hunting is not good because, as we well know, like Manuel himself loved hunting. No.
Yes, exactly. And actually, on his younger days, when he was in exile in Limnos, so this is where he went after Lesbos,
Hmm.
Kidones actually chastises him in one of his letters, saying that I see that you have become too devoted to hunting and you're neglecting your literary pursuits. So Manuel is also a big hunter as well, yes. Even the Castilian traveler Clavijo says the emperor was out hunting, he sent us half a boar, etc. But what Manuel, I think, is trying to do in the dialogue is to portray Bayezid as an immoderate man. Hunting is good. It is obviously what the nobility did, both the Ottomans and the Byzantines. But he criticizes Bayezid and makes the other Ottomans in the dialogue criticizing him for being immoderate. Like he takes things to the extremes. And he also puts these words in the mouths of the Ottomans. So it is like his subjects were criticizing Bayezid. So this is what he hits Bayezid with. And also much later, for example, we have another letter which is addressed to a Byzantine residing in Cyprus, and he criticizes King James of Cyprus for being excessively devoted to hunting. So
Oh.
for him, it is the immoderation.
Hmm.
But of course, we don't know like what did other people think of Manuel's hunting habits.
We don't. But I think it feels like a little bit of a projection, like especially after he was criticized for it by Kidonis. So like he's angry that he got criticized, and now he's saying, Bayezid is doing it as well, so I should say a thing or two about that.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, there is like 10 years in between, not 10, but several years between the two events. But yeah, why not?
Yeah, and I think Manuel, I think there's also other peoples who talked about Manuel and his hunting habits, like you said, Clavijo, the Spanish, right?
It's
I
from
think,
Castile.
yeah, and in some of the artworks that were drawn when Manuel went to Western Europe, I think he's also on a horseback, so I think that also left a very heavy impression on the Latins. So, on the topic of those Latins, what kind of influences did Manuel leave on them when he went to the West to seek help for Constantinople in the 1400, I think, right?
Yeah. So he embarks at 1399, and yes, it's basically 400. I mean, it's a fantastic episode because he almost stays in Western Europe for 4 years. And it is, of course, a big novelty to people who are in France, in England, in various Italian city-states, because it is this exotic emperor from the East who is coming. And all of them are really intrigued by it. So we have French chronicles, English chronicles, Italian chronicles, and all of them are like, yes, the Emperor of Constantinople came, so exciting. And many of them underline that this is so sad. Here we have this once magnificent empire that is now reduced to such a state that its ruler has to come and beg for our help. But interestingly, several of these chronicles, especially the Chronique de Saint-Denis, the French chronicle, seems to be quite impressed by Manuel. So he says, the author Michel Pintoin, that the emperor was of medium height, but he had a well-proportioned body, he looked noble, and he apparently was an excellent horse rider. So he says our king, Charles VI, presented the emperor with this beautiful white horse, and he, practically mounted it without his feet practically touching the ground or the stirrup. And Manuel was almost, he was 50 at the time, so it's quite impressive.
Yeah, all the
And
hunting, it has benefits, I can see.
yeah, and I think he also did enjoy horse riding quite a lot, which is not surprising. I mean, he's an elite man.
Hmm.
But yes, many of these, chronicles say that the emperor looked very dignified, and they obviously admired and respected him. And his, appearance inspired many miniatures, manuscript illuminations. Like, for example, several illuminations that belong to Jean de Berry, the uncle of the King of France, whom by the way, Manuel met. He even attended his daughter's wedding in Paris. There are several art historians who just suggest that maybe like the figures of Augustus or some of the Magi, etc., with the long white beard, were modeled on Manuel. And we also have maybe hints of Manuel's face elsewhere in other French manuscripts. We have, for example, one English depiction of Manuel from the 15th century from a manuscript from the Lambeth Palace Library, and it really looks like Manuel's Byzantine manuscript images. We also have probably medallions that were partially inspired by Manuel.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the Renaissance people, they found Manuel very interesting. But what about from Manuel's perspective? Did he find anything about Europe, which used to be part of the Roman Empire, to be very fascinating, like 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire?
Sadly, we have no clue about it. Because, yes, we have a lengthy theological treatise. Most part of it was probably completed when he was in Paris. So it's about the procession of the Holy Spirit. And we have several letters. We have a small ekphrasis, a depiction of a tapestry he saw in Paris, perhaps in Louvre, because this is where he was staying at the time. But apart from that, there are no impressions, like no depictions of the cathedrals, the people, the places. So we don't know. I mean, he complains to one of his friends that he was unable to converse with people in Paris as much as he wished to because they needed an interpreter. He seems to have greatly appreciated King Henry IV of England because he has a very laudatory letter about him, chiefly probably because Henry promised him help for Constantinople. But apart from that, all other sites and events and things he saw attended, we know from other European sources, like the Christmas banquet he had in the Alton Palace, like tournaments and banquets and other entertainments. He doesn't really speak about it at all. I mean, he only once mentions the Basilica of Saint Denis in his theological treatise, saying Saint Dionysius is buried here. But for example, we know from other French sources that he actually attended a service there. But he himself didn't speak about it. And he didn't learn Latin when he was there, perhaps to make a point that he was an Orthodox. And it didn't seem to have, impacted him very significantly when you look at his writings or any other such things. So for me,
However,
yeah, as his biographer, it's a bit of a disappointment.
yeah, I can
Yeah, I
see that.
wish we had more descriptions.
Yeah, because it was really like a momentous event. You can see all the commotion it caused in Europe back at that time. So, but do you know, like, if Manuel he has any influence on early Renaissance figures?
I mean, he was to an extent interested in establishing contact with them. So, for example, Guavino of Verona, he was a very important early Italian scholar. Manuel did meet with him when he was in Constantinople, and he actually sent him a copy of his funeral oration. And he suggests to Guavino of Verona that perhaps you could translate it into Latin and into Italian to circulate back in your homeland. So clearly he was interested having, sort of this, how to say, little advertisement among the Italian city-states that the Italian intellectuals should read it. And the funeral oration is, of course, like almost a mini history of Manuel's reign. We know that Guavina passed the oration to Ambroget ve Versavi, but it stops here. Or, for example, he did enter into debates with many Catholics when he's in Europe, but they also don't have a significant impact on his theological outlook. So I would say a very limited impact. I mean, what is more interesting, perhaps, is the fact that he sent Manuel Chrysolovas to Europe, where Manuel Chrysolovas was very well received, and he did influence many people. So I would say indirect influences on behalf of Manuel.
Yeah, so yeah, we can say that Manuel did sort of send Crusolas to Europe, which then launched more of the Renaissance. I do think there is one Renaissance figure that might be indirectly related to Manuel, and that could be Marsilio Ficino. Because we know that Marsilio Ficino, he attended some lectures by a Byzantine scholar, a very famous one at the time, called Dionysios Plethon in Florence, right? And that is why Ficino himself became such a very prominent Platonist later in Italy. So about Plethon and this despotate of the Morea, can you tell us a little bit about it? Because this was the despotate that Manuel's brother Theodoros ruled, and the one that was featured so much in this funeral oration. Like, what was very special about it?
Yeah, so this was really, I would say, Thessaloniki, Constantinople, and the Morea. They were like the most important three late Byzantine centers. And the Morea was at this point being ruled by a prince from the imperial family. So first, for example, it was the sons of Cantacuzínos, later it was Theodoros, and after his death, it was Manuel's son, Theodoros II. So this was closely connected to the ruling family. And of course, strategically, it was in a very important location. And it had quite a lot of contacts with the Latins because of all the, Latin territories around it. And of course, it was a place where Manuel himself had a very big interest in. So, for example, we know that he went himself to install his son Theodore II as despot, so that they wouldn't be like any problems, any uprisings, etc. He traveled in the Morea. We know that he built a wall there in the Isthmus, the Hexamilion. He rather renovated it against the Ottomans, and he was actually faced by a rebellion by the Mauryaans for that, because most of the Mauryan landowners, the wealthy ones, they were very much fond of their freedom, and they sort of tended to resist imperial authority there. So it was a pretty significant place, and even after the fall of Constantinople, Morea endured for several more years. And also, it was in itself an intellectual center too, because, for example, at the courts of Theodorus I, Theodorus II, we again have many intellectuals. So this was also perhaps obviously not as lively as Constantinople, but also a very important intellectual center. And Platon, he was actually part of the court of Theodorus II. So he actually taught in the Morea. He influenced many intellectuals there. And from the court of Theodore II, we actually have several Byzantine literati who became so prominent in terms of philosophy, theology, and other literary matters. So, and these people later, some of them migrated to Italy, and they had other contacts with the Renaissance figures. And Platon himself, when he was traveling for the Council of Ferrara, Florence, obviously inspired people like Ficino. And sometimes people think that because Platon nowadays is thought to be a pagan by many scholars, sometimes people suggest that, oh, did Manuel II exile him to the Morea? Probably not. We are not sure as to how much of his beliefs Manuel was aware, or like any other people at the time were that aware. But I mean, it is not an exile because this is the court of his son. where he has a prominent position, he is able to teach. And not only that, Plato actually wrote a very small preface to Manuel's funeral oration.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I guess we can say that the Morea it will become is sort of a very free intellectual center, like I don't know, a modern university campus or something like that of the late Byzantine Empire.
Yeah, who knows about the analogy, but clearly, I mean, because you have so many people there who are around Platon, who are inspired by him, and you just obviously Platon is the big star, but you have so many other stellar figures. So clearly, it was a very sort of, how to say, fruitful and open environment.
Yeah, and we know that a lot of these people from the Morea, like Platon and the students, they obviously held Manuel in high regard. But what about, well, philologists now? What do they think of Manuel's works?
I mean, philologists like Athanasius Angelou, for example, they do enjoy Manuel's work. For example, Angelou has worked on Manuel's prose rhythm. Especially in the previous decades, Manuel had a bad reputation, at least among the historians, because, we tended to look at Byzantine literature only as historical sources. So he had received quite a lot of complaints. Oh, this is too rhetorical. He doesn't say of anything of value here. He's too difficult. He's always, trying to imitate the ancients, etc. But nowadays, I think this approach has changed. And if you read it as a piece of Byzantine literature, with in mind all the different layers of meaning, what its functions were, what was the desired outcome from it, you can really appreciate Manuel. I mean, so I hope at least that many more people find him to be a worthy author. Scholars of theology like Havelambos Dendrinos, for example, who worked on Manuel's theological work, especially the procession of the Holy Spirit, thinks that Manuel is a very able theologian. He is well educated. He is of good caliber. And personally, I think he's a nice author. I do enjoy reading his works in Greeks. I think his works like the dialogue with a Persian, they can at times be very entertaining, intriguing, and I quite enjoy his literary style. But of course, this is a personal choice. So maybe if you were to ask this question to another historian or to another philologist, they would answer differently. But I think there is, I think he's a good author. And if you like put your mind to it, there is quite a enjoyment to be savored from Manuel's works.
Yeah, I think from this whole conversation, we can see that you view him very positively. And I hope that
Yes.
after we publish this one to the internet, more people will be interested into reading his works, discovering his legacy. So, yeah. I
Yeah,
have
I hope so
one.
too. Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
No, don't worry, don't
Okay,
worry.
in terms of Manuel's works, if people would be interested, his funeral oration, the dialogue and marriage, the letters, all of these have been translated into English. The dialogue with a Persian has a total German translation. So just for any people who might be interested in reading some Manuel, there are options.
Yeah, I will put those editions in the description below as well. So anyone can be interested and read them. I'm going to have end this conversation with one final question, and I want your personal opinion on it. So, we know that Manuel, he was a very diverse writer. He dabbled in many genres, from theology to philosophy to politics to orations. So, do you think it's fair if we call him like a philosopher emperor, like so many people have called Marcus Aurelius or Julian the Apostate? Like, obviously, Manuel has written much more than them, so does he merit the title even more?
I think so. I mean, first, I think it's totally fair. Second, I think he would be delighted because already at the time, several of his correspondents and panegyrists, so people who wrote orations for Manuel, they called him the philosopher emperor. So obviously, it was an epithet that he really enjoyed. So already in his times, he was called that, obviously as a compliment, because we're speaking about panegyrics. But I think it is really, really fair to say, because I mean, you really cannot separate Manuel's authorship from him. Writing and thinking and, altering works, discussing them, this is such a big part of who he is. Not only is his output massive, so if we were to calculate like these 33 works into modern page accounts, it would be more than 1000 pages.
Yeah.
As you said, the output is really diverse. And also he, I think, merits it because he's really interested in ethical philosophical philosophy as well. I mean, he has the seven ethical political orations, he has other works, he is very much interested in Aristotelian ethics. So I think it's completely fair to call him that.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that he was like this philosopher emperor at the end of the empire, and that finally we end with someone like that, a very colorful figure, and make sure that the empire doesn't end on too sad of a note. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
so interesting. I agree.
I think now we are going to have to end the conversation as well. So I want to thank you so much for spending your precious time talking with me about Manuel. I think it's very important that we remember this person, not just as his political legacy as a Roman emperor, but also like as an author, especially now that he's been dead for 600 years.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you so much for hosting me here. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I have to say, I absolutely love your drawings and videos.
Aww.
The ones on Manuel II are obviously my favorites. And I mean, I keep getting like screenshots of them and I send it to other scholars and they love it too. I
Oh my
even
god.
sometimes show them in class. Yes, I mean, I think they're so witty. Like, for example, the Siege of Constantinople, you have this thinking bubble from Manuel, and he's like having little nightmares about this monk who's reading the Quran so he can please his new Ottoman masters, like how he's admired in Milan, how his mother is yelling after him, eat your vegetables. I think they're just so cute. I love them so much.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored that you'll put them into your lessons, so feel free to put any of them. I'm very honored. I like it when my drawings are used for education in Byzantine history. And
Yeah, but don't worry, I put your tag there, so yeah,
of
everybody
course,
knows where it is coming from.
thank you so much for this as well. And yeah, I think hopefully if we talk again, I will be referring to you as actually a professor next time.
I hope so too. Thank you. Thank you so much for the good wishes.
Thank you so much for your contributions to Byzantine studies. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
You too.
Bye. Thank you everyone so much for listening and tuning in. I had a great time working on this interview, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you managed to listen all the way to the end, if you among the audience has any suggestions or remarks about the interview format for content, do leave a comment so I can know if this is something that you enjoy and how I can improve future ones. If you are someone interested in coming on to discuss a cool topic on the channel, feel free to reach out anytime. Now, I wish you all a good day. Hopefully this interview inspires you to read some of Manuel's stuff on his day, and now to thank the patrons who keep this channel going. Dragon Lord, Rhomaion Game Projects, Cody Dan Roth, T-Ropita Productions, Francis Morin, Archduke Rhomaion Lands, Patrick Gappo, and Kia Sig. Thanks everyone.